hear even less talk about Wyoming than travel nursing, so let's talk about both today. Hey you, welcome if you're new, welcome back if you're not. Thanks for clicking in any case. My name is Olivia. I am a travel nurse by profession, and I also have a passion for international travel. This is my series about travel nursing and possibly nursing generally later down the road, because that's my story about how I do all these international travels that I talk about in my other series over here. So if you notice today, I have the Wyoming flag. This I actually got from work and I still love it. I just love everything about Wyoming. We're going to be talking all about that in my assignment out there today. So just stick around for the story. If you want to hear about compensation, I'm going to be totally straight with you. Because I'm still working with this agency and they haven't given me full permission to talk about my pay package, I'm playing it safe and not giving specific numbers, but I will be talking a little bit about my compensation at this timestamp I'll put up on the screen. And I'll try to put it down below too. Still figuring some of these things out. Anyways, let's get to the story. I had left / semi-abandoned my car in a airport in Boise, Idaho about a month before, after I finished out my Washington assignment, because a blizzard hit the middle of the country when I was trying to get the car to the Cheyenne airport to leave it there. So my sister and I flew from Texas, where we had been visiting my granddad, to go up to the Boise airport and get my car. And then it was I think it was literally like a day drive, maybe a little bit more, for us to actually get all the way out of Idaho and into Wyoming proper. The first night in Wyoming, we stayed in this really cute little lodge that also seemed like it could be a great setup for a horror movie. Her and me even scripted one out while we were laying in bed trying to go to sleep. I don't know why we did that. And then we woke up the next morning and I walked outside, and this was like early April, but there was still snow falling. And we had gotten there late at night. We got actually into the Wyoming border late at night. And I remember walking outside and there's this snow falling, and I look around and there's these gorgeous mountains. They were the craziest, most amazing mountains I had seen since I had been in Peru. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is where I'm going to be living for like 3 months at least. It was just 1,000% God's country. I was just like, oh my gosh. And we kept driving, and then we finally got to the little town I would be staying in. I was so excited for this little town. You drive up, and a cool thing about Wyoming that I really love is that you can be driving through, and well, for one, you can drive and drive and drive, and sometimes literally for 2 or 3 hours you're driving and there's no exit, there's no gas stations. You really have to plan your stops out. And I was trying to tell my sister that because my mom and I had already drove through once, so we kind of had an idea, but she was just mind blown of how big and wide open it still was. Anyways, on that note of it being so big and wide open, you will occasionally pass by signs that are like, exit signs, or sometimes it'll just be a sign that pops up. You see a house in the distance and a little sign pops up that says, welcome to XYZ town population, and the population will literally sometimes be 10 or 15. It's so crazy. It's like, I don't even think half of them have a post office. A lot of times you'll have 3 or 4 like micro towns that share one post office out there. But when we finally got to the town I was going to be staying in, I wanted to stop at that little road sign. It said, welcome to Worland, Wyoming. I'm going to go ahead and let you know because I want to give little Worland a shout out. That was where my assignment was. And it said, welcome to Worland, Wyoming. Population, I think at the time, was maybe 3,000. The elevation above sea level was literally higher than the population. The elevation is about 4,000 feet up, which was also great for when I wanted to train for exercise and everything. It got me so good in shape. I just loved everything about this town. Oh my gosh. One little hiccup though, and something you should think about if you're looking into doing rural, I can never pronounce that word, rural assignments like this, is that housing can get pretty tricky. I had gotten fortunate. So let's talk about travel nursing housing for a second. There's multiple different things you can do. You need to make sure you always have documented pay though, because you need to be duplicating those expenses if you don't want the IRS coming after you. And nobody wants the IRS coming after them. I've heard horror stories about nurses that have made mistakes with that, and they end up literally tens of thousands under for those kind of things. All that to say, you can live out of a camper if you want to, but you need to make sure you can prove you're paying for a lot or something to keep the camper in. And if you're going to stay with relatives or friends, you need to have some kind of documentation that you're paying some kind of rent that is within fair housing. I think that's the word. There's a little chart you can look up for your state, like fair housing prices, or something like that, and it'll pull up a whole little chart. Let me see if I can put that link up here. Yes, y'all, it's called Fair Market Rent. I'm gonna put it up here and put the link down in the description for a little website that I found that has all kinds of cool information for that. And it's cool because you can look at housing prices like, oh my gosh, California is ridiculous compared to the rest of the country. Let me see if I can put you up a screenshot of prices by location. Anyways, that's a good thing to be looking into whenever you see contracts, because you see those nice Cali contracts, but then you see that the average cost of rent in California is like $2,300 a month is what it's saying for Santa Barbara right now. That's why I haven't been out there yet. By the way, I'm gonna make sure I put this disclaimer up here as I'm talking about that a second ago, but none of that was official financial or tax advice. That is not what I'm certified in. I am just a travel nurse trying to look out for myself and help you look out for yourself. Make sure you're talking to an accountant too, please. It will save you so much, everything. Anyways, that was a little ramble there. But in Worland, what I did was I went onto a website called Furnished Finder. I feel like a lot of travel nurses use Furnished Finder, or you could use Facebook Marketplace to find rentals, although Facebook Marketplace is not quite as secure as Furnished Finder, but the prices can be a lot better. And also sometimes recruiters will give you local listings. I know that for Worland they did that, and for a lot of other small towns they'll help you have local leads. But I got lucky and found the only Furnished Finder in Worland, which was titled Cabin in the Woods. And my family was so sketched out. They were like, you need to be careful about bears, and oh my gosh, like how far out of town is this cabin? And it said that it was only 15 or so minutes from the hospital, but also I was in the middle of nowhere, so when you're in a town in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't take very far away to be in the total wilderness. But I really did want to try to have housing secured ahead of time, and it was a good price, so I was like, okay, we'll go for this. Well, we get out there and my sister and I can't find the cabin. We're just literally driving through a field, and we had to pass one person's house, and then Google Maps told us to just keep driving through the field, and then we come across like this ranch with gates and fences and everything, and we're like, we're not driving up onto the random person's ranch. We already feel really sketched out for driving through this field because maybe it's somebody's property and we don't see a cabin anywhere. And at this point I'm getting concerned because I had heard horror stories about travel nurses booking accommodations and then you get there and it's not real. Because the thing is, most of us book ahead. We can't afford to look for housing once we're there because a lot of times we don't get there until maybe the weekend before the assignment. So we're always taking a gamble. And I was like, don't tell me that the second time because also I knew how hard it was going to be to find housing out here. But I'm trying to stay calm because my sister's freaking out thinking I got scammed too. And I just, messaged my landlord or my future landlord, and I told him, hey, we could not find the cabin. We just ended up in a random field. The thing is, Google Maps also doesn't work that great out in Wyoming. At least it didn't back 2 years ago when I was out there in 2022. So I thought maybe Google Maps just glitched and it sent us to a field. But my landlord was like, oh, no, that house that you came across in the field is actually our house. You drive up to it and then you drive a little ways down the way and then you get to the cabin. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, now we know we can drive up through those gates. Good. So we get to the cabin the next day now that we know what we're doing. And the first thing we noticed was there was just this huge pile of animal bones and antlers all along a tree kind of close to the cabin. And it freaked my sister out so bad. But the thing is, it was formerly a hunting cabin, so it was very woodsman-y. When you went inside, there was a antler chandelier, and there was all kinds of taxidermy to animals. And there was a million beds. There was literally like 2 little rooms full of bunk beds and then another bed up in a loft. It was a vibe for sure. But it also creeped us out, especially my sister, because she's more superstitious, and she literally felt like the bones were there to ward off some kind of spirits or something. And then she started creeping me out, and I was disappointed that I felt so creeped out because I just wanted to go outside at night and look up at all the stars, because I think those were the most stars I ever saw in my life, because I probably could have seen stars like that when we were walking between Hidroelectrica to go to Aguas Calientes down in Peru, but I wasn't thinking about that because I was trying so hard to get to the town. And now I finally have the opportunity, but I'm kind of creeped out. Also, it was cold. Oh my gosh, it still felt like the middle of winter. We had our winter coats on. But because we both felt so creeped out, we literally just, we stepped outside for a minute to look up at the stars together. And then my sister got really freaked out, so we just went back inside, made some warm food, and watched a ton of Disney movies. Then it was time for my sister to head back to my home state and for me to start my assignment. My assignment was a small little critical access facility. It had 19 beds in the whole hospital, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't know whether or not that included the emergency room base or not. But basically the whole hospital wasn't much larger than the size of some very large floors I've been floated to at larger hospitals. And it was just such a sweet community vibe. Everybody knew everybody's name. And even a lot of the patients were familiar with everybody. But also you had patients coming. If you weren't sick enough to go to some of the larger cities and you were from a ranch like 2 hours away, you would head into that hospital. And one of the things I really loved about it was that I got to be the nurse I always wanted to be, but that ratios don't let us be. Because realistically, each nurse only had 2 or 3 patients max. Sometimes there would be 2 patients and 3 nurses on the floor, because with critical access you have to make sure that you have enough nurses ready in case there is an emergency or a code, even if for the whole 12 hours that never ends up actually happening. So I have my 2 or 3 patients and they're not so sick, because if they're so sick they have to go up to Cody or down to Cheyenne or Casper anyways. So, they're just sick enough to be in the hospital. And a lot of times maybe it was, people with addiction issues, especially alcohol out there. And when they get anxious, I could just take them for a walk. We would walk to the family room, we would do a puzzle. I would just sit on the bed with them and talk. And those are the kind of things that I feel like a lot of us dream about doing in nursing school, but then we get up to big hospital B or whatever, and we realize that's not real nursing. But I got to just be in this little bubble for a while, and it was amazing. I also just loved the time I had in between to talk to my coworkers, because most of them were locals, so they just talked about what it was like living and growing up in such a small town, especially because some of them were older, so they grew up before the internet, so they were very isolated. One of my coworkers told me a really funny story about how when she first went out to college and she was driving and she didn't know what a one-way street was. So when the police pulled her over asking her why she was doing that, she genuinely said, "I'm sorry, I'm from Worland, Wyoming, and I didn't know what that was." And so they let her off. But yeah, it was so cool and mind-blowing to me, like something out of a movie, learning more about small town life to that extreme. A fly has entered the chat. My apologies if you hear or see him. Anyways, I promise I didn't forget to talk about the money. So again, I am treading very carefully here, and we're not going to talk specific numbers because this is still just a fun little hobby for me. But I will say the pay was only slightly less than the great one I had out in Washington before. The catch was because we were such a small hospital, there was frequently days that I would be called off, and I did have to have it in my contract that I agreed that they could call me off, which means tell me not to come into work at least, I think it was up to one shift per 2 weeks. So that wasn't too great, and it was a lot harder to get overtime. So in the end, I was making significantly less. Also, I'm going to do a little call out about a system here. Hopefully it doesn't negatively affect me later because I would love to go work back out there again. But I have to say, at least at that time, Banner Health Systems, they're more in Arizona than they are in Wyoming, but they do have some facilities in Wyoming and I think also New Mexico and possibly Colorado. Anyways, I didn't know this, but at the time they were notorious for dropping rates mid-contract. I had my rate dropped about 3 or 4 different times. One time it was before I even started. I got a call from my recruiter while my sister and I were still on the way there. Luckily I had service at the time. And she said, "Oh, hey, I'm just letting you know they want to go ahead and drop the rate a little bit." And I said, "Okay." Well, I wanted the experience so bad that I was okay with it, and it was still good pay. But by the end, because I renewed at least one time, they had dropped me pretty significantly. I was kind of like, well, I'm glad that I hadn't budgeted with the expectation of that original pay. But yeah, just be wary of that too. You should always have the opportunity to go ahead and cancel the contract right then and there because they're technically breaching on their side if they lower the pay. But your pay could very well be lowered once or multiple times within the lifespan of a 13-week contract. And if you choose to re-sign, it may not be for the same amount of money. So just something to be keeping in mind if this is a career path you're hoping to go down. Outside of work life, oh my gosh. So yes, it was a little bit isolated. But the great thing about being out there in the middle of nowhere is that when people do see people, everyone's so friendly because, I mean, we're the only ones around. You might as well be. Worland was such a safe, nice little town. I know that things could have very well changed in 2 years, but back in 2022, it was still very common to see kids walk, like, 5 and 6-year-olds walking down the street to the convenience store by themselves or just with their 7 or 8-year-old sibling. And people left their doors unlocked in the middle of the city. Oh my gosh, it was just such a refreshing, different vibe, especially coming from Washington, which, while it was beautiful, there was quite an epidemic of homelessness, and I honestly did not feel safe walking in the downtown area on my own, especially at night. So in that sense, Worland was just a total breath of fresh air. There wasn't so much to do in the town itself. They had more diverse food than I was expecting them to. There was a Mexican restaurant, but it wasn't all that, especially because I had been to Latin America and I'd been going to more authentic places with some of my friends out in Washington, so I was not impressed. It was pretty much tacos and burgers. Very American Mex. But they also had a Chinese restaurant and it was just called Asian food restaurant, but it was, a mix of Chinese and Thai. So that was really good. And the owner was so friendly. Oh my gosh. There were things to go see as long as you were willing to take the drive. There's a beautiful canyon that takes you from South Wyoming up into Middle and North Wyoming. Oh, let me pause real quick and find the name of that canyon because I want to tell you. Oh, it's called Wind River Canyon. Oh my gosh, you should look it up. If you're ever going through that part of the country, please take the drive through there. It's beautiful. It goes through a reservation. There's all these tunnels. Oh, I just love it so much. The closest thing I can think of that it reminded me of was actually Aguascalientes in Peru, but this river is so much bigger. Oh my gosh. to the east of Worland, there's a place called Tinsleep, and it has these beautiful cliffs that look like they're painted red because of the clay in them. I went to a music festival there and tried, they call it Indian fry bread, but it's a Native American food. I tried that for the first time, and that was really great because I had seen it on a TV show before, and I had always wanted to try it. And then, of course, to the west, there's Yellowstone. One of my coworkers from Washington met up with me and Cody, and we went out to Yellowstone together. I got some beautiful pictures on the lake in the Tetons, which is a separate park, but if you're going to go to one, you should go to both, and you should definitely check out Jackson Hole. They have some great food. Being in Wyoming, I'm not gonna lie, like I said, they had more selection than I was expecting them to, but as someone who's not so big on traditional American fare, there wasn't much going on in Worland or even in Cody. And Cody was so far away, I wasn't gonna like go 2 hours on a regular basis just to have some different food. But they have some bomb restaurants in Jackson Hole. Oh my gosh. Something I found kind of funny, even though I'm technically from the city, was how detached a lot of the tourists apparently are from nature. The kinds of warnings they had to put up that just seemed like such common sense to me, but my coworkers told me no, there's been like actual problems, like tourists trying to pet bison. Apparently one tourist took a baby bison, put it in her car, and took it to the rangers and said, "It's cold outside, he needs to go into a shelter." And I had one coworker who said that she was giving a horseback ride through the park, and somebody said, "Oh, so at what point are we going to see the bears?" Like they just expected the bears to be in a little section like it was a zoo. I did not realize there were people who were that level of disconnected with nature. But yeah, so that's interesting. Let me know down below if you relate or you know somebody who that would relate to. Besides Yellowstone, I honestly didn't do nearly as much as I would have liked to in Wyoming because I was saving up for a big international trip we're going to be hearing all about over in my other series. I would love to go back out there someday and see Devil's Tower, learn some rock climbing. There's apparently even a place out there where you can surf because there's natural waves in the river. I want to go surfing in Wyoming. Oh my gosh. In short, I love Wyoming. I was there in the summer, to be fair. If I had been there in the winter, maybe I wouldn't be saying that because I saw stories from my coworkers about how insane the winter gets out there. But I would love to go back for another spring through fall season to enjoy the amazingness that is Wyoming. And I guess that about wraps it up. Be sure to come back around next Monday. I'll be talking about this crazy nightmare assignment I had after I got back from my big international trip. And if you want to start hearing about the big international trip, be sure to tune in on Friday for a regular installment of my international travel series. Thank you so much for clicking in. I hope you have a beautiful week and see you next time. Bye!